He never touched a drop of alcohol, yet his son's wedding was a £15 million spectacle with Jennifer Lopez serenading the crowd. How did Gopichand Hinduja rise from his family's modest trading post to build a global empire and become Britain's richest man? Gopichand Hinduja was born in January 1940 into a Sindhi Hindu family that had made an unusual home in the heart of Iran. Decades earlier, his father, Parmanand Deepchand Hinduja, had left the town of Shikarpur, then in British India's Sindh region, and moved to Bombay to start a trading business in 1914. By 1919, Parmanand pushed beyond India's borders and set up an outpost in Tehran, Persia. It was there, in Iran's cosmopolitan bazaars, that the Hinduja children grew up. The family dealt in everything from carpets and tea to dried fruits and spices. In those early years, the young Gopichand could often be found at his father's side in Tehran's bustling marketplace. He watched Parmanand negotiate with all walks of life, local merchants bargaining over sacks of onions, British and Indian bankers discussing cotton prices, even Persian aristocrats seeking luxury goods. Surrounded by a swirl of languages and cultures, the boy absorbed an unwritten lesson. Business was about building relationships and trust as much as making profit. The Hinduja household was traditional and disciplined despite the worldly environment. They were devout Hindus and strict vegetarians. The brothers would later be known never to drink alcohol or smoke, a rarity in elite business circles. Every morning began with prayers, and every deal was guided by a simple family credo instilled by Parmanand. My dharma is to work so that I can give. The children were taught that wealth was a means to serve society. Our parents taught us one thing: everything belongs to everyone. Nothing belongs to anyone, Gopichand recalled decades later. It was a lofty principle of collective ownership that the Hinduja brothers pledged to follow from a young age. In the warmth of their close-knit home, this ideal bound the family together. But would it hold forever? In 1947, when India gained independence and was bloodily partitioned, the Hinduja's world in Tehran remained intact. Parmanand's enterprise was already international and insulated from the upheaval on the subcontinent. By then, Gopichand was a curious 7-year-old, fluent in Sindhi and comfortable in Persian. His eldest brother, Srichand, was 12 years his senior and already learning the ropes of the family business. The Hinduja children grew up watching their father conduct meetings in their Tehran home and in hotel lobbies, dealing with princes and politicians as easily as with shopkeepers. One oft-told story has Parmanand hosting a visiting Indian Maharaja and an Iranian general at the same dinner table, a scene that left a deep impression on young Gopichand about balancing diplomacy with enterprise. The family emphasized values: generosity, humility, and faith. Gopichand's mother, Jamuna, would feed any visitor in need. No one left the Hinduja home hungry. What I learned from my mother from childhood was how to be generous and spiritual, how to feed everyone, he later said, crediting his parents for his character. This mix of traditional morals and international ambition shaped Gopichand from the start. He was being prepared, almost unconsciously, for a life where he would navigate different worlds and yet hold on to core principles. In the mid-1950s, Gopichand was sent to India for higher education, a homecoming of sorts to the land of his ancestors. He enrolled at Jai Hind College in Bombay, a city then bursting with post-independence optimism. He studied commerce and soaked up the bustle of Mumbai, as Bombay would later be called, a port city not unlike Tehran in its energy. He graduated in 1959, earning a degree and, more importantly, a first-hand experience of modern India. That same year, 20 years old and eager, he officially joined the family business. Gopichand's first job was at the Hinduja trading office in Bombay, but very soon his father and brother needed him elsewhere. The company's base was still Iran, so the dutiful son packed his bags and moved back to Tehran to work under his father's watchful eye. In Tehran of the early 1960s, he cut his teeth handling shipments and paperwork. One of his initial assignments was decidedly unglamorous, arranging exports of Indian onions and potatoes to Iran, where demand for fresh produce was high. It meant haggling with farmers in Maharashtra for tons of onions, then coordinating their transport by sea to the Persian Gulf. In another deal, he helped source iron ore in India to feed Iran's small steel mills. The work was gritty and often thankless. One missed shipment or a cargo gone bad could wipe out profits. But it taught Gopichand common sense and caution in business. He learned how to manage slim margins, unpredictable supply chains, and diverse partners, lessons that would serve him for life. Yet business wasn't all sacks of grain and minerals. The 1960s also saw the Hinduja family experiment with a more glamorous trade: Bollywood films. Indian cinema was hugely popular among South Asian expatriates and even local audiences in the Middle East. Srichand, the eldest brother, sensed an opportunity to distribute Indian films abroad. Gopichand enthusiastically assisted. Together, the brothers secured rights to screen Bollywood blockbusters in Tehran and beyond, from romantic musicals to action dramas, long before Indian movies had a global market. Crowds flocked to these screenings, and the venture became an early success for the young Hindujas. One could imagine Gopichand in his late 20s, standing at the back of a packed cinema hall in Tehran, watching Iranian families laugh and cry at the antics of Raj Kapoor or the songs of Lata Mangeshkar. The profits from film distribution were reinvested into the trading business, but more importantly, this experience showed Gopichand how diversifying into new areas could pay off. It also honed his instinct for understanding different cultures. He saw firsthand that entertainment, like business, required knowing your audience. By the end of the 1960s, the Hinduja enterprise spanned continents. There was the home base in Iran, trading offices in Bombay and Calcutta, and deals reaching as far as Europe. Gopichand, still in his late 20s, rotated between these hubs, absorbing everything. Then a personal loss struck that would test the family's unity. In 1971, Parmanand Deepchand Hinduja, the patriarch who had started it all, passed away at the age of 70. His death marked the end of an era for the Hinduja family. Gopichand, 31 years old, and his brothers were suddenly at the helm, without their guiding light. At Parmanand's funeral in Bombay, the four surviving brothers, Srichand, Gopichand, Prakash, and the youngest, Ashok, reportedly stood together in prayer, vowing silently to uphold their father's legacy. They reaffirmed the principle Parmanand had taught them: everything belongs to everyone, and nothing belongs to anyone. It was a moment of both grief and steely resolve. The Hinduja brothers agreed to continue operating as a single unit, sharing assets and decisions in the collective spirit their father wanted. Gopichand, as the second eldest, became Srichand's right hand in this new era of the family business. But even as they pledged unity, the world around them was about to change in ways that would demand difficult choices. Throughout the 1970s, Gopichand helped steer the family firm through rapid growth and geopolitical turbulence. In Iran, where he spent much of his time, the Shah's regime was modernizing the economy, and there were lucrative contracts to be won. Gopichand strengthened the company's trading links between India and Iran. They branched into new commodities: petroleum products, machinery, textiles, whatever opportunities arose. By the mid-70s, the Hindujas had quietly become millionaires, though they kept a low profile. "If we have something we like doing, we do it. If you make me work for money," Gopichand once said, implying that wealth was not the sole motivator. Those who dealt with him found him polite, even unassuming, always preferring to let results speak rather than boast. But behind the scenes, he was growing into a shrewd negotiator. In Tehran, he cultivated connections with powerful figures in the Shah's court and industry, leveraging the family's status as trusted traders. At the same time, he maintained strong ties to India. He frequently visited Bombay and Delhi, mingling with bureaucrats and industrialists, and positioning the Hinduja Group to seize opportunities as India slowly opened up certain sectors for private enterprise. As the decade waned, however, dark clouds gathered over Iran. By 1978, massive protests against the Shah hinted at an impending revolution. Gopichand had spent nearly 2 decades building the business in Iran, but now the country was on the brink of upheaval. The family made a fateful decision. It was time to shift their base to a more stable environment. In 1979, as revolution swept Iran and the Shah's government collapsed, the Hindujas quietly moved their headquarters to London. It was a decisive turning point for Gopichand and his brothers. Suddenly, they were in a new city, a global financial capital, with a chance to reinvent their enterprise on an international stage. But it also meant leaving behind the home that had nurtured their success. That year, while Ayatollah Khomeini's followers were chanting in Tehran's streets, Gopichand was thousands of miles away, on London's bustling Oxford Street, scouting an office location. The move was a bold gamble. Would the family that prospered under the Shah manage to thrive under the very different rules of the West? In London, Gopichand embraced a low-key profile at first, operating out of a modest office block viaduct near Regent Street. He was now in his late 30s, adapting to British life, a world of tweed suits, afternoon teas, and a reserve quite unlike the vibrant chaos of Bombay or Tehran. Despite the culture shift, he found London a perfect hub for global expansion. The family began investing in Europe and North America, even as they kept businesses in India and the Middle East. Gopichand led by example, working long hours and studying new markets. He obtained British citizenship in 1997, formally making the UK his home. But already by the early 1980s, he had become the public face of the Hindujas in London, entertaining bankers and politicians in the drawing rooms of Mayfair. The family purchased a historic mansion at Carlton House Terrace, a grand colonnaded row of houses near Buckingham Palace, as their London residence and office. Visitors described stepping into that residence and being greeted by walls adorned with photographs of the Hindujas alongside world leaders. There was Gopichand and Srichand with the late Shah of Iran, with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, with Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, even a snapshot with Mother Teresa. These images signaled the brothers' network of influence, yet Gopichand himself remained personally abstemious. Dinner parties at his home featured gourmet vegetarian cuisine and no alcohol, in line with the family's values, even as luminaries of business and politics mingled under crystal chandeliers. By the 1980s, Gopichand Hinduja was ready to shed the remaining image of being just a trader. He wanted to transform the group into an industrial powerhouse. The opportunity came in 1984. That year, the US oil giant Chevron decided to sell off the international operations of Gulf Oil, a storied petroleum company. The Hindujas moved swiftly. Under Gopichand's leadership, the group arranged financing and struck a deal to acquire Gulf Oil's businesses outside the US and UK. It was a daring move into the oil sector, but he saw energy as a cornerstone for the future. The acquisition, completed when Gopichand was in his mid-40s, laid the groundwork for a broader industrial empire. Flush with this success, he immediately looked for the next big prize. It came 3 years later, in 1987, when Britain's ailing automotive conglomerate, British Leyland, was seeking buyers for some assets. Among them was Ashok Leyland, India's second-largest truck and bus manufacturer. The company was struggling, and under India's tight economic regulations, few believed a foreign investor could step in effectively. Nonetheless, Gopichand saw potential. In a landmark deal in 1987, the Hinduja Group purchased Ashok Leyland. This was the first major investment by a non-resident Indian in India's modern history. Industry observers were stunned. At a time when India's economy was not yet liberalized, how had an overseas family acquired a stake in a key Indian manufacturer? Some skeptics whispered that the Hinduja's political connections greased the wheels in New Delhi. Gopichand brushed aside the rumors, focusing on turning the company around. The stakes were enormous. Ashok Leyland was a household name in India, supplying trucks for the country's highways and buses for its cities, but it had been on the brink of collapse. Failure to revive it would not only cost the Hindujas a fortune, but also their reputation back in their motherland. Could an outsider really save an iconic Indian industrial firm? Gopichand dove into the challenge. He dispatched his younger brother Ashok P. Hinduja to Mumbai to oversee day-to-day operations, while he himself traveled frequently to the company's factories in Chennai. He met with factory workers on the shop floor, listening to their grievances. He brought in new managers, infused capital for modernizing machinery, and leveraged the group's global network to find new export markets for Ashok Leyland vehicles. Over the next few years, the turnaround took hold. By the early 1990s, Ashok Leyland returned to profitability and began to thrive, rolling out improved models of trucks and buses that became ubiquitous on Indian roads. What many had thought impossible had been achieved. Today, that company is celebrated as one of the most successful turnaround stories ever in Indian corporate history. Gopichand's bold gamble had paid off, silencing the doubters and cementing his reputation as a visionary businessman who could bridge East and West. With those acquisitions, the Hinduja Group had arrived on the global stage. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Gopichand led the expansion into power, infrastructure, banking, and technology. In India, the family teamed up with other non-resident investors to found IndusInd Bank in 1994, one of the first new private banks in the country after decades of state control. In Switzerland, they acquired a bank in Geneva, Hinduja Bank Privé, becoming the only Indian-owned Swiss bank of its kind. Their company, Gulf Oil, grew into a global player in lubricants and specialty chemicals, and they eventually merged it with a US firm to create an even larger entity. By the turn of the millennium, the family's empire stretched across 5 continents and employed tens of thousands. They had interests in trucking, oil and gas, banking, IT services, media, real estate, you name it. Gopichand, from his base in London, was orchestrating this vast array. He had a talent for picking capable executives to run individual companies, while he and his brothers provided overall strategic direction. The Hindujas operated by a unique model, 4 brothers acting as one soul in 4 bodies, as they like to say. Major decisions were made collectively, and the brothers formally agreed that no single member would claim exclusive ownership of any asset. It was an unconventional approach, especially as the family's wealth skyrocketed, but for a long time it worked. Mutual trust, respect, cohesion, and cooperation were the family's core guidelines in business, reflecting the spirit their father had instilled. However, as Gopichand's influence and wealth grew, challenges emerged that tested his resilience. One of the first major crises struck from an unexpected quarter, a political scandal in India that had little to do with trucks or oil, and everything to do with international intrigue. In 1987, word leaked of alleged kickbacks in a massive arms deal known as the Bofors scandal. The Indian government had bought artillery guns from Sweden's AB Bofors, and now investigations suggested that middlemen had been paid off. Shockingly, the Hinduja brothers' names surfaced among the accused. In the early 1990s, Indian prosecutors charged Srichand, Gopichand, and Prakash Hinduja with receiving around $8 million in illegal commissions to help secure the Bofors contract. Gopichand vehemently denied the accusations, insisting any money they received was for legitimate consulting work. But the case cast a long shadow. For the next 14 years, as the Indian courts inched forward, Gopichand had to live under the cloud of being an accused in a high-profile corruption scandal. He and his brothers appeared in court, posted bail, and fought the charges in both India and Switzerland, where some funds were traced. The protracted legal battle was draining. A judge later noted that it caused huge emotional, professional, and personal loss to the Hindujas, even as the brothers maintained their innocence. It was an ironic predicament. Publicly, Gopichand was being ranked among the world's billionaires. Privately, he had to answer lawyers and worry about reputational damage. Only in May 2005 did vindication finally come, when the Delhi High Court dismissed all charges against the Hinduja brothers for lack of evidence. The judge criticized India's Central Bureau of Investigation for presenting useless and dubious materials and declared the case effectively baseless. Gopichand, at age 65, walked free of the Bofors taint, his record legally clean. Outside the courthouse, he and his brothers released a statement saying the ruling provided judicial endorsement of their innocence and lamenting the long period of harassment they had endured. The scandal that had nearly ensnared them was over. But even as he breathed a sigh of relief, another controversy had already been swirling in his adopted home, Britain, testing his composure in a different way. In 2001, Gopichand found himself entangled in what the UK press dubbed the cash for passports affair. By then, he had lived in London for over 2 decades and was keen to cement his status as a British citizen. Around the same time, the Hinduja brothers made a generous contribution of $1 million towards the Millennium Dome, an ambitious UK government project celebrating the new millennium. When it emerged that a British cabinet minister, Peter Mandelson, had contacted the Home Office regarding one of the Hinduja brothers' passport applications, a political firestorm erupted. The implication, never proven, was that the Hindujas' donation might have been linked to expediting their citizenship, a suggestion of quid pro quo. Mandelson, a close ally of Prime Minister Tony Blair, resigned amid the controversy to quell the uproar. Gopichand maintained that he had done nothing improper. Donating to a public project was not illegal, and he eventually did attain British citizenship in 1997 on merit. Still, the episode was an uncomfortable lesson in public perception. The sight of a billionaire industrialist seemingly receiving favors did not sit well with the public, and Gopichand became a target of media jibes for a time. Ever discreet, he chose to largely avoid the press during that period, letting official inquiries do the talking. A subsequent report cleared him of wrongdoing in the passport matter. By the mid-2000s, these storms had passed. In their wake, Gopichand seemed to double down on a philosophy that had been ingrained in him. Wealth and power must be coupled with humility, and service. "You don't have to be rich to do good," he reminded a gathering in 2001, emphasizing that money was not what gave life meaning. His priority, he said, was to give happiness to others and remain humble even in great success. Those words resonated, coming from a man who indeed had reached rarefied heights. Through the 2000s and 2010s, Gopichand Hinduja kept expanding his business footprint while also becoming a quiet philanthropist. The Hinduja Foundation, which his father had started years ago, grew more active in areas like healthcare and education. In Mumbai, the PD Hinduja National Hospital, founded by his father in the 1950s, was modernized and expanded with the family's support. Gopichand funded scholarships in India and the UK, though he rarely publicized it. Those close to him knew he believed deeply in the motto, "Service to mankind is service to God." He lived relatively simply for a billionaire. He continued to be a strict vegetarian, waking up at dawn for prayer and yoga. Business colleagues often noted that meetings at his office would pause at lunchtime for a vegetarian meal that he would insist everyone share, no matter how high or low their rank. Despite his low-key demeanor, recognition found him. He was honored with an honorary doctorate of law from the University of Westminster and a doctorate of economics from Richmond College in London, accolades for his contributions to industry and philanthropy. In speeches, Gopichand would often invoke the wisdom of his elders. He recounted how his father's first principle was work to give, meaning work hard not for personal gain, but to be able to give back. He also shared that his father believed the world is a family and even disdained excessive legalism, preferring to settle matters with trust and a handshake. These traditional ideals stood out in the hard-nosed world of global finance, but they earned him respect. As one observer noted in a profile, Gopichand exemplified integrity, unity, and philanthropy in an age often defined by cutthroat competition. By the late 2010s, the Hinduja Group had reached astonishing heights. In 2014, the Hinduja family topped the Sunday Times Rich list in the UK for the first time, and they would repeat that feat multiple times. Publications regularly estimated the family fortune at over 21–30 billion, placing them among the wealthiest in the world. Their companies together employed over 200,000 people across 48 countries, a far cry from the handful of clerks in a Karachi storefront where Parmanand had once started. Gopichand himself, often listed simply as GP Hinduja in rich lists, was by now in his late 70s. He continued to work daily, splitting time between London and global travels, before his health began to slow. He had also become something of an elder statesman for the Indian diaspora. At forums and banquets, he championed stronger economic ties between India and Britain, seeing himself as a bridge between the two nations. "We have always been working to see what best we can do between India and England," he remarked at one London business gathering, "because we believe our responsibility is to act as a bridge between the host country and the motherland." Coming from Gopichand, this was not mere rhetoric. It described how he had lived. He cultivated friendships across political lines, from Conservative Party grandees in Britain to Congress Party ministers in India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the Hinduja family on visits to London, and Gopichand was known to advise quietly on matters of UK-India trade. In recognition of his role, the UK often turned to him as an unofficial ambassador to India's business community, and vice versa. Yet behind the public image of harmony and unity, a serious rift was forming within the Hinduja family. The seeds of it had been planted years earlier, even as they repeated their mantra of collective ownership. In 2014, all four brothers, Srichand, Gopichand, Prakash, and Ashok, signed a one-page letter affirming that assets held by one belong to all, essentially formalizing their long-standing philosophy that there are no individual owners in the family. At the time, it seemed like a wise move to prevent future disputes. But as the next generation grew up, and as the eldest brother's health declined, misunderstandings crept in. Srichand S.P. Hinduja, the patriarch and Gopichand's elder brother, began suffering from dementia by the late 2010s. With Srichand's ability to participate in business diminished, his eldest daughter, Vinu, became protective of his interests. In 2019, a confidential disagreement burst into the open. Srichand's side of the family claimed that Gopichand and the other two brothers were attempting to cut them out of certain decisions and funds. The crux of the dispute was the validity of the 2014 letter's principle that nothing belongs to anyone individually. Vinu and her sister argued in a London court that this letter should not dictate Srichand's personal assets or the future of his branch of the family. Essentially, the nephews and nieces were now questioning the collective ownership credo that the brothers had lived by. For Gopichand, this public family feud was perhaps the most painful crisis of all, coming in his twilight years. In court filings, his side argued that the four bodies, one soul policy still held, and that all assets were meant to be managed together for the good of all. Srichand's daughters countered that their father's true wishes were to keep his share for his own descendants. By 2020, the matter was in the High Court in London, with embarrassing headlines about one of Britain's richest families battling itself. Personal letters and medical reports were scrutinized in court. Observers were struck by the irony. The Hindujas, who for generations had preached unity, were now airing their rifts in public. Gopichand, nearing 80, attended some hearings in London, appearing somber. The press noted that he would sit quietly as lawyers sparred, occasionally conferring with his brother Prakash next to him. It was a far cry from the image of four brothers celebrating festivals together or jointly cutting the ribbon on a new factory. Would the family's bonds survive this test? In May 2023, Srichand Hinduja passed away at age 87, frail and having never fully recovered his faculties. The loss of his elder brother was a heavy blow to Gopichand. Srichand had been not just a sibling, but a mentor and business partner for over 6 decades. At the funeral in London, Gopichand performed the rites with his younger brothers, just as they had done for their father half a century earlier. Amid the sorrow, there was also a realization. Gopichand was now the de facto patriarch, the chairman of the Hinduja Group, and the keeper of the family legacy. Perhaps spurred by Srichand's death, the feuding family members sought a resolution. In November 2023, only a few months after losing his brother, Gopichand and his nieces reached an amicable settlement to their long-running dispute. The details remained private, but an announcement was made in court that the litigation was withdrawn and the family called a truce. Effectively, both sides agreed to set aside the contentious 2014 letter and work out a division of assets in a way that maintained peace. This agreement ended years of public discord and was a relief to Gopichand, who had always valued family unity above all. Insiders say that even during the feud, he would send prayers and gifts to Srichand's wife and daughters, trying to keep personal affection separate from business quarrels. With the feud resolved, at least formally, Gopichand could finally breathe easy about the family's continuity. He turned his focus back to what he loved: business vision and nation-building projects. By this point in his early 80s, Gopichand's appearances had become rarer, but his impact was undiminished. In 2023, he saw one of his long-cherished projects come to fruition: the transformation of Britain's historic Old War office, building into a luxury hotel and residence. The Hindujas had purchased the sprawling 67,000 square foot Edwardian landmark in Whitehall some years prior, and Gopichand personally oversaw parts of its redevelopment. In September 2023, the Raffles London at the OWO Hotel opened its doors with great fanfare. The building where Winston Churchill once had his office was now a glittering symbol of the Hinduja footprint in the UK. At the opening event, attended by royals and celebrities, many noticed an empty chair where Gopichand was expected. In truth, his health was beginning to falter by then, and he could not attend the gala. But his son Dheeraj, who had taken on leadership in the automotive ventures, spoke on his behalf. It was a proud moment. An immigrant family from Sindh had not only become Britain's richest, but also the custodians of British heritage buildings like this. The Hinduja family's UK real estate portfolio also included their mansion near Buckingham Palace and other properties, underscoring their deep roots in London. Even as he slowed down, Gopichand ensured that professional management and the next generation were in place to carry the empire forward. His elder son, Sanjay Hinduja, ran the group's Gulf oil and energy interests, and his younger son, Dheeraj Hinduja, became chairman of Ashok Leyland. His daughter Rita and the other third-generation members were also involved in various ventures, from banking to renewable energy. Gopichand's younger brothers remained active too, Prakash overseeing European operations from Monaco and Ashok handling Indian businesses from Mumbai. In effect, Gopichand had orchestrated a smooth handover of day-to-day responsibilities, while still being the binding figure that everyone looked up to. In the final phase of his life, tributes and accolades flowed in for Gopichand Hinduja. Despite his immense success, he never accepted the label of tycoon with much enthusiasm. He considered himself a custodian of the family values and wealth, not an owner. When asked about the secret of the family's endurance, he would smile and repeat his father's mantra, that my duty is to work so I can give. And give he did, both in charity and in mentorship. Many younger entrepreneurs of Indian origin in Britain saw him as a mentor. He was generous with advice, often inviting budding business people to his home for tea, urging them to build bridges between East and West, as he had. Money does not play an important role in life. What is important is to give happiness to others, he told an interviewer in his 80s. This philosophy of finding purpose beyond profit truly defined him. On 4 November 2025, after a brief illness, Gopichand P. Hinduja passed away in a London hospital at the age of 85. In the official announcement, his family noted that he had been unwell for several weeks prior. The news of his death reverberated from London to New Delhi. It marked the end of an era, as one close associate in Britain's House of Lords remarked. Messages of condolence poured in. A British peer and friend, Lord Rami Ranger, said, "His passing marks the end of an era, as he was truly a well-wisher of the community and a guiding force." In India, the Prime Minister acknowledged the contributions of the Hinduja family to industry and philanthropy. Longtime employees remembered him as a boss who treated them like extended family. For those who had seen the Hinduja story unfold over a century, Gopichand's death was a poignant moment. It was hard not to think of the boy in Tehran who watched his father bargain in the bazaar, the young man who took risks to expand the family trade, the leader who navigated crises and kept the clan together, and the elder who never forgot the simple lessons of duty and charity. Gopichand Hinduja's life journey spanned from the dusty markets of Sindh and Tehran to the halls of power in London, a trajectory that mirrored the broader saga of the Indian diaspora in the 20th century. He transformed a small family trading firm into a diversified conglomerate that today straddles continents, Under his steady hand, that enterprise grew to employ hundreds of thousands and touch industries, from trucks and oil to banking and media. Yet he always insisted that the wealth was not his alone. It was the family's and, by extension, meant to serve society. In an age of individualism, he stood for a different ethos. Everything belongs to everyone, he would say, and he tried to live by it.